Reform's leader, Nigel Farage, recently said there's been an exodus of the super rich from the UK. The now ex-French Prime Minister, François Bayrou, said as he was being ousted, don't let France become like Britain, because he said the rich are leaving because of high taxes. So we've been wondering, are they actually leaving? And do we care? Evan, we should start with the first question. What do we know about the exodus?
Well, that's a really good question, Sarah. And you and I will have heard anecdotal evidence. It's been reported in newspapers. You have conversations with someone who knows someone who's very rich and says they're all going. And I put some weight on anecdotal evidence, by the way. We shouldn't dismiss it, because often the anecdotal evidence is ahead of the statistics. The statistics may pick it up in a year or 2 years, but you know, you get Savills saying the really top-end property market in London has been hit by absence of foreigners and people putting up their very expensive Mayfair homes to sell. We've stories of people going, of schools where the kids are leaving, of unemployed butlers because they were working for a household that is leaving. So, I mean, the anecdotal evidence has pointed that way, but it has been fiercely disputed because there have been statistics, and there were HMRC statistics coming out just the early part of the financial year that seem to be saying it's not as bad as people think, and seem to be saying it's exactly what was budgeted for by the Office for Budget Responsibility when they looked at tax changes that might drive people out of the country.
I think they said it was like the exodus of millionaires had gone up by 5% or something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think millionaires count for toffee. I'm sorry.
We're talking about billionaires, aren't we?
I think it's billionaires you're talking about, or non-doms, the people who have got enough wealth that they're on this rather special tax regime.
Right. So I spoke
UK.
to someone who works in an investment bank. I mean, his job is basically to advise billionaires on how they should structure their finances and their family money. And he said there are 22 to 25 billionaires that he has a direct relationship with. And he says more than half have left or are one button away from leaving. They're just, and as he put it, they're just waiting to see if there's a reverse. And the reason he gave was inheritance tax change.
And that's the one people focus on. So we've had a quite generous regime called the non-dom regime for people who are resident in the UK but can persuade the taxman that they are kind of foreign. Then, even though they're resident for tax purposes here, they're domiciled elsewhere. Their heart is elsewhere. They'll be buried elsewhere. And you can kind of see it's a concept that does, you know, you might spend 200 days a year here, so you're resident for tax purposes, but you may, for all intents and purposes, have a family and a heritage elsewhere. And we've had a generous regime for that category of people, the non-dom, resident but not domiciled. It's a kind of fine distinction. That is what's changed over the last 2 years, because we had said to those people, if you keep your money outside the UK, it's outside our tax. We don't care about it for our tax purposes. And so they've been able to have masses of fortunes overseas, untaxed. And that's what's changed. And inheritance tax in particular. So if you've been here a few years and you die, 40% tax on your entire global estate. And if you're kind of an Indian billionaire or an Egyptian billionaire, you might be thinking, I would rather be somewhere else than pay the UK government all that on my estate.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the numbers, because when these change, you think, well, it seems rather small. It's not going to, really, is it going to make that much difference? There is someone else I spoke to who is leaving. His whole family is leaving, and that's because of the changes in the budget, which meant that his children will probably lose control of a family business that has been in the family for more than a century, and they don't want to be the generation that loses family control over it. And that's mainly because it was a business that was founded overseas, although they've lived here decades, and that's been swept up into these changes.
And that's inheritance tax again, isn't it?
It is.
And the wealth experts do say the inheritance tax aspect of this is the bit that is most shocking to some of these people who have a choice about where they can go.
I mean, it was interesting speaking to him. He said, I do not mind paying 40% on actually even more of it. It's just the heritage. And it's interesting the way it shakes down. But then we get to the question of whether we care. And if you speak to a wealthy person, they'll say, oh, I'm not going to talk about this because everybody just thinks it's a wealthy person. Should we care more broadly? Is there because in terms of the amount that's coming in from them?
Well, look, OK, let's get the figures. So in 2023, there were about 75,000 people who were in this non-dom category. I think those are the ones one might focus on. Those 75,000 people paid about £9 billion of tax. So that's about 120,000 each, something like that. Now, what that says to you is, I mean, so 9 billion of tax coming from people who would be a very small, a small town, really, medium-sized town, and 9 billion. We're making a profit on those 75,000 people very clearly.
Yeah.
You wouldn't
It'd be
say,
nice to
go
have.
away. We don't want. We don't want you. Now, 9 billion in the scale of UK government revenues is nice to have. It's not kind of decisively switching one regime to another. But it's clearly you're making a really comfortable profit on those people, and why would you say we don't want it? And then you add to that the economic business that this country has specialised in. It's been sort of written up favourably and unfavourably as a sort of butler to the world super rich, in which you have estate agents and you have
schools,
financial services and schools and divorce lawyers and everybody who is serving this whole ecosystem, all based in London, by the way. It's not a levelling up industry. It's a London industry, all functioning here.
Well,
that has
hold
kept
on a second.
people
These
employed.
are people who have enormous country piles, and then there's an ecosystem around each of those.
No, that's a fair point. No, that's a fair point. But I mean, look, this has been a significant industry in the UK. Obviously, you can take out an industry like that and the estate agents will survive or they'll move into other professions. So I don't worry about the economy kind of somehow having the ripcord pulled from under it. We're not Monaco, which is really an economy that serves the very wealthy. But we are an economy that's made quite a little bit of money out of that. And so you probably wouldn't want to turn them away if you could find a way of keeping them.
And we have always actually, I don't know, I was about to say we've always, but you look at recent decades and the UK has been trying to attract wealth.
Well, I don't know, sir. I remember as a child, 1970s, you assumed that no rich person would be in this country, live in this country. Mick Jagger, where was Mick? You wouldn't dream of the idea that Mick Jagger lived in the United Kingdom, was a resident here. Just everybody kind of rich and famous was overseas because no one rich and famous was in the UK because they all had choices, and why would you want to be paying an 80%
But I
tax?
think this is very interesting because I can't help feeling that this many decades later, people are much more mobile with their lives. Yeah. You think about the amount of people who have a place in Spain or France or, whether it's in Europe or further afield, and certainly in these wealthy, that once you get to a wealthy level, like the super wealthy, they could go and, Mick Jagger, I think he still has a place in Mustique. He probably, you count your days, don't you?
Yeah,
the super wealthy.
You don't want to be 180 here or 181. So look, definitely something changed in between the 70s and the 90s, and people did start coming back. We've made an industry out of that. By the way, quite a lot of that in the last 15 years has been wealthy Russians, oligarchs, Indeed. And the like. And then there's been a bit of concern about, are we just a home to kleptocrats and are we actually just money laundering
money?
Yeah. But I think the real reason why this has been difficult for the UK government is that if you could just pick out 75,000 super rich people who'd come here and pay a couple of 100,000 of tax, you'd say, please come. The real reason for not doing that, because those people are clearly profitable to the nation and they don't take up much space and they bring money in. You actually, as a government, you want to tax you actually want to tax the pretty rich as well, because there are a lot more of them.
Yeah.
And you need to make money from them if you're a government trying to balance the books. So you might be saying,
We don't care about the non-doms, but we do care about the next tier.
I want inheritance tax from the kind of top 5% of households in the UK. And in order to get it from the top 5%, it's really hard not to catch the super rich who may be immobile and thus leave. So you're trying to make an inheritance tax system that works and brings money in, and you can't exempt the super rich very easily, I think, is one problem.
I mean, we've been hearing it a lot from the TUC conference this week. There is tremendous pressure and coming up to a budget, so it's not just the TUC, tax the rich, that there is more that can be got from the wealthy.
Everybody would rather someone else paid the extra tax, and if you can get it from the wealthy, the public will certainly vote for getting it from the wealthy rather than from themselves.
So given this environment, do you think it's unlikely anything will change? So if there is an exodus, it will continue?
I don't know where Treasury thinking is at this point about how serious the exodus is. But what I would say, though, and this in a way reconciles the different stories, the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, when they looked at what the government was doing, factored in an expectation that maybe a quarter of non-doms with trusts overseas, which were one big category, very badly hit, non-doms with trusts, they were factoring a quarter of them would leave. So that's quite a lot. They were already factoring in, if you like, quite a big...
They were assuming that. It wasn't the case that if more than a quarter left, then it became counterproductive.
Well, you were still raising money from it with a quarter leaving. Now, if the numbers leaving go really high, you might start saying, are we actually making money or not? And there have been some saying you're barely making a penny out of it. The CBR have said that. But I think the OBR say, we think it's a quarter leaving. You still make a lot of money out of it. Obviously, you're not making any money out of those people, but you're making it out of the people who stay, and you need some money, so that's why you do it. That's the kind of argument I think that's been going on.
OK, so the answer to the question, do we care?
Nice to have. Nice to have rich people bringing money in if you can. But you can't distort and twist your whole economy to merely trying to get them in. If they don't want to be here, you've got to run a tax system that raises enough money. And